And now we'll go across the water to Princeton, to the CTI, and first Robin Lovin.
I am Robin Lovin from Southern Methodist University, and more importantly for today, from the Center of Theological Inquiry in Princeton. And I want to thank Michael Velker and the Templeton Foundation for arranging this opportunity for so many of us who've been a part of these projects to share our thoughts together. As Michael himself has mentioned a number of times, CTI has had an institutional role in these conversations over our entire 30-year history. We are an independent study center located in Princeton, New Jersey, and we have important ties to Princeton Theological Seminary, Princeton University, and to the life and work of Sir John Templeton, who was one of our founding trustees and who gave us what is perhaps our most important facility resource, 12 townhouses that provide a residential center for our scholars. Sir John gave those in honor of his mother, Bella Handley Templeton. And he also shared a vision with James McCord, who was president of Princeton Theological Seminary at the time, that there ought to be a place where theologians could come together and push the boundaries of their discipline and do that in open discussion with scholars in other fields. It's that vision that gave rise to the kinds of dialogical programs that Michael Velker has already described, that's part of CTI from the beginning, but it's also allowed us, with the help of the Templeton Foundation, to move to some more intensive discussions that have really begun just in the current year. We begin with a new approach to our research programs this year that will be focused on assembling a team of 10 to 12 scholars who will work on a common topic, spending full time, most of them for a full academic year. We ask our scholars to make a kind of monastic vow not to go about giving lectures and visiting other institutions, but to spend their full time in residence at CTI and in conversation with one another. The result of that is that the 3 or 4 meetings that Michael described, in which we begin to understand the questions and understand each other a little better, those 3 or 4 meetings now happen in the course of 3 or 4 weeks. And you have the remainder of the academic year, I think, really to push against some new frontiers in terms of what these interdisciplinary discussions can be like. The inquiry on evolution and human nature, which is the first of these projects, is just now getting underway. You know some of the people who are involved in it because Jeff Sloss is one of our scholars for the year, and also Aku Visala, who is here as one of the winners of the Templeton Essay Contest, is in the group this year. So you can check the accuracy of my report with them during the breaks, but I think we're already learning some important things about these interdisciplinary conversations. What a residential project gives is time for people to listen to one another. Academics always find time to talk. Listening is sometimes another matter. So that theologians and scientists, as they approach each other, often begin feeling that the dialogue is going to be a matter of asking and answering 1 or 2 specific and persistent questions that they've all heard before they arrive. Theologians think they're going to be asked about altruism or the consciousness and how consciousness can survive without a material embodiment. Scientists think they're going to have to explain how there can be complexity without design. And both sides worry about the meaning of moral behavior. But what really becomes clear in these discussions is that whether or not those specific questions get answered, both evolutionary science and systematic theology aim at providing comprehensive accounts of human experience. And the underlying question behind all those specific questions is whether an account that tries to be comprehensive also has to be exclusive. That is to say that as science and theology put questions to one another, sometimes superficial questions that arise out of a brief acquaintance, each must also be putting deeper questions to itself about the nature of the explanations it offers and the space that those explanations offer for other explanations. Robert Bella, in our celebration of the Templeton legacy of the idea of spiritual progress last week in Philadelphia, said that Stephen Jay Gould had it half right in the sense that science and religion represent different kinds of intellectual authority, different magisteria in Gould's terms, but the magisteria overlap, and that's the problem. I would add that the overlap is not just an accident of intellectual history, but it is in fact a necessity, that the completeness of the framework that each kind of discipline is trying to provide requires that kind of overlap. Now, it's possible to eliminate the overlap. We can do it by a reductionist science that excludes any kind of theological explanation, and we can also do it with a kind of narrative theology that prides itself on its incomprehensibility to those who don't share its story or its virtues. But those who think of their work in those terms would have little reason to want to come to Princeton for a year and talk to each other. So we're looking for people who are worried about those areas of overlap. It may be that CTI is dependent in these projects on the altruism of scientists, since I think our programs will not make major contributions to neuroscience, evolutionary biology, or even the sociology of religion. But we hope that our commitment to this kind of dialogue will say something important about the nature of theology in our time. And as we begin this 3-year project with the support of the Templeton Foundation, the most important result that we have to share already out of our earlier experience is this reflection on the nature of theological inquiry and how you do that inquiry in a way that respects the interaction of these different comprehensive explanations. In that thinking about the nature of theological inquiry, we have been guided and helped by my co-leader in this 3-year project, Professor Friederike Nuessel, Professor of Theology here in Heidelberg. And I'm going to conclude my introduction to our project by asking Professor Nuessel to tell us a little more about the understanding of theology and theological inquiry that we're working with over these 3 years.
Well, thank you, and I just should say again, my name is Friederike Nuessel, and I teach systematic theology at Heidelberg University, and at the moment I'm also serving as the Vice Rector for Education, and this is a way in which I make many more experience about interdisciplinary discourse and meeting the sciences than I had before. I would like to just make some remarks on or explain the special approach in the dialogue between religion and science of CTI in referring to 3 major challenges I see for theology, and it's a center of theology, theological inquiry. So there is a challenge for theology in the first place. And the first one comes from the history of theology itself. Christian theology is and always has been an interdisciplinary enterprise. Theologia, the teaching on God, as the ultimate reality involves some reflection on reality, and so has cosmological, anthropological, psychological, social aspects, also political and economic dimensions. The impulses from humanism, Reformation, and the Enlightenment, however, not only led to a multiplication of academic questions and research areas, but also to a differentiation and multiplication of academic disciplines, and then an even ever more growing gap between the sciences and the humanities. As a result, we find in the 19th and 20th century a strong emancipation process in which new disciplines, not many new disciplines, not only the sciences but also social sciences and humanities, defended their distinctive approach and academic character and stressed the borders rather than the connections. Theology got involved in this process. The theologians among us know that for the formation of modern theology, the movement of dialektische Theologie, and especially Karl Barth and his scholars, were of great influence in defending purely theological standards for theology and its encounter with other disciplines. For some decades, the Barth school and also what we call Wortgottestheologie prevented theology from actively supporting and participating in interdisciplinary discourse. And I think we still have to struggle with the obstacles for theology to engage in this discourse. We have a different situation today. Secularization, the loss of church members, and recently, especially the rise of new atheism, challenge Christian churches in Western civilizations and then also theology. In this constellation, theology has a growing responsibility for explaining Christian faith on an intellectual level to the academia, and especially in the dialogue with science. But how can we approach this dialogue? And this brings me to the second challenge. If you look back at the Darwinian revolution and how the theology reacted to that, you can identify three patterns. The first pattern in the reaction to Darwin was antithesis or contradiction. So to say that there are two different and incompatible approaches, science and religion. The second reaction was the way of integration or inclusion, to try to include scientific findings into theological explanation and description. And the third way, the third pattern that emerged at that time was to just say that there are distinct or different explanations of the reality which would not interfere, which would be on different levels, but so there is no need of having a discourse, actually. If you look at the 20th century development, you can easily detect all these patterns again, and I think on different levels. You will find them in theology, but you will find them also in the public sphere and in attitudes of people towards these questions. The question, however, for academic theology is whether these different patterns result from a thorough reflection of scientific explanations and their impact on theological claims, or whether these patterns merely result from a theological assertion or conviction, pre-assumption, about the nature of religious language, the nature of Christian faith, and the respective status of theological assertions. So for theology today, I think it is very important not to define the borders or the ways of connecting to each other along the lines of these patterns, but to find the way in discourse itself. And I think this is the kind of discourse that CTI supports, not work with a pattern ahead, but maybe get a consciousness, awareness for this. So a third challenge is a very pragmatic challenge. after decades of this emancipation process, we are now in an age, I think, in which interdisciplinarity is something that is very important, and you get grants for this and so on. But if you want to engage in real interdisciplinary discourse, it is still very difficult, because Nobel Prize winners used to be successful through highly specialized research, and they wouldn't have time, they wouldn't have time to interact with humanities or theologians, whatever. And in this situation, I think theology has to see, and actually this conference and the CTI project is an example for this. We have to play an active role. And in order to benefit from interdisciplinary research, future theology needs to demonstrate that there is an added value of interdisciplinary conversations and research. And this can only be done through good examples and something that is convincing to the academy. So this brings me to my final point. What ways could we go in having a discourse between religion and science? And I mean, there are many ways, like this conference, but another way could be the one CTI is doing now and being sponsored by the Templeton Foundation. And it offers a special way in several respects. The first one is that the program brings together researchers who, through their application, have committed themselves to interdisciplinary research. The second is that they will not only come together for a conference or a joint teaching program, but for 1 or 2 semesters in which they focus on questions, framing questions in conversation, and in their own work. The third point is that this conversation is not limited to official meetings, but fellows work in the same building and they live in the same neighborhood. So this gives many more levels of interdisciplinary discourse. And the final thing is that this discourse is focused on what was said, framing questions, which these scholars in a way share and can explore together. So I think what could be the result from this, and how can this be a good example for a fruitful and prosperous interaction? I think one level is that, of course, there will be results for the framing questions themselves. But on the other hand, I think it will show new ways of interaction between religions and science we cannot think of yet. So it is maybe a 2-level enterprise, and it may help us to be able to do future planning of theological formation that will meet further challenges and a further complexity of challenges.
Thank you very much. Have we got our microphones? No? Are there any questions?
So I'm sorry, I'm Jennifer Wiseman from the American Association for the Advancement of Science. I hear from Dennis Alexander what the Faraday Institute is doing that seems to be very much engaging the public and engaging non-specialists, non-theologians in particular, and people interested in science, but a wide range of people in this dialogue on science and religion. And then the other institutions I've heard from are really much more into the academic realm of theology. And I was wondering if there's any way of kind of bringing these two realms together, of bringing the highly academic and scholarly work on science and religion and somehow blending it or helping it communicate, that level communicate more with the public interaction level of discourse that's done at the Faraday Institute, and also with a program that I run, the Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion. Do you have any comments on that?
Is this a question to the CTI people more than the...
I would pose it to anyone who would like to address it. So.
Well, let me take a shot at that, because I think, first of all, CTI is a very small institution, and I think we started off, 30 years ago thinking of that kind of broad mandate, and what we've discovered is we can do really well those kinds of academic conversations. That the first thing we learn with the discussions of religion and science, but also other theological areas as well, is actually we all get a lot of practice in trying to talk about our work in a more public context. And what we're working for is the conversations where people realize the answers that the questions that they haven't answered yet. Now, I think what that implies, as you suggest, is we ought, all of us here, to be thinking about those kinds of cooperation that are possible, because what goes on at the Faraday Institute really points out how important it is to get this word out to people who don't participate in the academic culture at all.
Dennis?
Perhaps I can make a brief comment. Yes, I do think, if you look at the number of people out in the scientific community who are ready and willing and able and have that right kind of background to get straight into a very serious, in-depth discussion with theologians, that is fairly small subset, of the whole. So I suppose we can't, all of us, do everything, and I think it's quite good if we do focus, and I think it's fantastic that the CTI is there. But I suppose in some ways our role is reaching out to the scientific community with a very wide range of activities that actually they're willing to engage in. And until they're willing to begin to engage, they're never going to make it to CTI. So in a sense, I think we all have, we all have different roles in that sense. And one way, we hope that the people that were getting interested in the discussion now, albeit possibly at not great depth, may be the people who in 5 or 10 years' time might end up at CTI, who will then be. So I think we all can work in parallel and complementary exercises to try and do what we're sort of good at, and not feel that we all have to do everything, you know what I mean? So much better do a few things well than, lots of things not very well. It's the old adage, isn't it?
I'm sorry I missed some of the discussion. I had the feeling that much of the important big questions, the issues or so on, are kind of relevant at the graduate student or graduate level. I'm interested, as Dad was, as well as the kind of things that can engage people at a younger level. The Aston, Dr. Aston in UCLA did an extensive study of both public education, colleges, universities, small colleges, the whole spectrum in the United States. 40 to 45% of youth, as they entered what we would call in America the freshman year, primarily wanted to know, how can I begin to understand meaning and purpose? How can I begin to decide what are the important questions? How can I begin to find how to get answers in a personal way, but also in a larger way? She continued the study and then found by the junior year that they no longer asked why questions or purpose questions. So I'm interested perhaps in a larger context, whether that's possible in Europe at least, as what might be called undergraduate level, to have courses such as purpose. Why is it okay to still ask why? Or why are we so much more than just the facts? Is that a relevant dissemination, as Dennis has been trying to do with the Faraday, how to reach the level of those who are still at the launching career of where they might go once they have a sense of direction?
Jack, could I just mention, I think you were out of the room when I was mentioning about the Learning About Science and Religion project, which aims very much to do that. And so, just to flash up a few slides I showed before, but one of the aims of that project is to develop resources and a website which will enable pupils aged around 13, 14, 15, 16 to begin to ask the big questions. And so they have a whole range of fun stuff. I love going on this website. It's great fun, actually. So you can do all these games and stuff, you know. But they have a whole range of voices there, which are trying to engage young people in asking the big questions. And they've got these posters which they've been sending out to schools, doing workshops in schools, doing sort of conferences to invite young people and that kind of thing. So we actually, I have to say, are huge believers in starting young. And I sometimes get teased by other members of the Faraday staff, you know, how young are we going to go? And we had an inquiry the other day about children's books on science and faith. Could we advise, please, for the age range of 4 to 5, you know? So in a sense, but I think that's exactly right. You know, I think it starts very early that people start separating science, religion into different compartments and so on. That starts at the age of 5, I think 6, 7, very, very early. So yeah. Validation of, yes.
That would be a part of courses that would be a part of the general wider perspective of how I'm going to focus my studies, what I might decide to pursue in life, and so on. Are you suggesting that that's, I don't think you are, that that's too late?
Well, I think
it's the
that needs to
validation
be
is
done
that the
as
university would allow those kind of courses to exist.
Yes, I think that's also needed as well. But I think also this project would more get the idea across to, in the education system, the faculties of education through publications, that something needs to be, more training needs to be done for teachers actually in the educational colleges, so that the science teacher can teach science in a way that's non-reductionist, which is not building all kinds of ideologies into the teaching of science, which does happen quite a bit, I think. But likewise, the teachers of religious education, I think, need a lot of education about how to do this, you know, the positive attitude towards science, and not sort of feel, oh, that's not my field and I shouldn't say anything about it. So I think it needs to be built in, certainly into the teaching qualifications that people have. That would be very helpful.
Yes, my name is Gunnar Thomas. I'm teaching systematic theology at the University of Bochum. I have a question. If I look around at my colleagues, mid-career colleagues, and if I look at young PhD students, they are in an incredible and competitive environment. And at the same time, I see much more curiosity to the big questions, the framing questions, than we sometimes think. There is a lot of curiosity. But the problem is, how do you maintain, deepen the momentary curiosity? And so how do you make colleagues so interested that they dare to jump out of their competitive career tracks? And now my question is, what do you think, what are the most powerful structural and institutional tools you see, given your experience and your background? And I have to admit, I enjoyed very much my time at the CDI. So I think we do have a lot of potential for dialogue, but a lot of mid-career and young people are in the kind of cage of their very much disciplinary career track.
Do you want to say something to that?
Yeah, I could, and Frederic may have, from the German experience, a different idea, but I think you're exactly right about that problem. Indeed, I'd push it one step further, and that is that as many of us, you know, continue our active careers far beyond what used to be retirement age, in some sense, we've allocated the big questions to the senior people, and we've told the younger scholars, you know, you need to go ahead and get tenure and specialize. And I don't think that's a healthy division of labor. We need creative thinking by new voices on the big questions as well. Institutionally, of course, the Templeton Foundation is a very important resource here, because for those younger scholars, funding is crucial, not just dollars to do the work, but the evidence from external sources that the questions they're asking are important and that they're respected by a wider group of peers. So I think you raise a very important question that those of us who do academic administration need to be thinking about as well. And Frederica may have thoughts on that.
Well, I could just add some experience from our university. We are experiencing the effects of a change in our school system that was made some years ago, because the time at high school is now 1 year shorter than it used to be. So this brings students under pressure. They have to do everything to keep for time management and be quick. And so I think there is a new task for theology, and especially in the university, to somehow provide a platform for the questions you mentioned, helping them to ask questions about purpose and meaning. But our experience in Heidelberg is that this question is the best way to motivate this discourse is interdisciplinarity. And this is why we have this, we call it Marsilio's study program. The name is the first rector of the Heidelberg University, who was an interdisciplinary scholar. And now this, in teaching, this means that we bring together students from different disciplines. And as soon as they meet, they see that they are asking different questions, and then they also will discuss immediately the outreach of their questions. And so I think this is a contribution, at least, to such a dialogue.
Thank you. Michael.
I agree wholeheartedly with our panelists that the different institutions have to see what they could do best and only in some part can extend. So the Faraday Institute does a wonderful job in generating information beyond the academic discourse, but the CTI would be overburdened. So the CTI has a few public lectures each year, but it simply could not design a program to help kids to improve their knowledge. But I see an enormous need for that, because we have these cliches out there that are not only limiting the insights of our students, nor already the children. So I think already in kindergarten and early childhood education, we have to deal with these cliches. The world was created in 6 times 24 hours, says religion, and this is not true. Creation and evolution are foes, and so we have a split world here. Also, religion says the world is good, but we see life living at the expense of other life. So that even the biblical creation account, when it says the world is good, it doesn't say it's paradise. Yeah? Top life furthering includes finitude and death and so on. And I think honesty is crucial. And we have overridden honesty very much in the general education. And it is very important that we get it down to the very young people, that they get the feeling not only science tries to raise truth issues, but also religion. And sometimes, of course, since the topics are so complicated, religion overdraws the boundaries of honesty and truth. But in principle, we should say, no, this is not the case. And so we need a better teaching from early childhood on, and have to combat particularly the cliches in the area of creation topics. So we have maybe 10, 12 cliches in creation topics that are deeply, deeply seated in the minds of people, and then build up this distrust against a religion. And I think it is very important to work on this.
Yeah, just to also come back to the whole issue of how to engage, let's say the scientific community more, and how we can go about that and so on. I mean, I do think it's amazingly important. I mean, just with having people like Martin sitting here on the front row, that those who are in the scientific community make time, you know, to actually stand up and give lectures around the place in different universities in the area of science, religion, or cooperation, or related topics. And that fact alone, I think, you know, can be an incredible social validation, as it were, you know, for this discourse. And I think the problem with the scientific community right now, and I think many of the countries represented here, is it's so secular that the possibility of the discourse is discounted. You know, even having the possibility of the discourse is not even counted as something plausible, if I can put it that way. And so I think rather we want to create plausibility structures within which people can then see, actually, this is actually something plausible we can do. You know, it's not crazy. You know, we can actually have this discussion. And I think the best way for that is for key people, well-respected scientists within the community, to be willing to give some time to stand up and give a lecture. But I think also the meal afterwards is critical, the food, and also to invite colleagues in who wouldn't normally come, you know, have a nice meal, but then have a discussion around the table. I think that should always be built into these public lectures whenever possible, because it engages a whole wider spectrum of people. And again, they have a chance to meet with a lecturer and really have a good conversation. And I think those conversations can certainly lead on to other interests. So, okay.
I'm Ted Peters from Berkeley, California, Center for Theology and Natural Sciences. I'm thinking about Dr. Templeton's voiced concerns about young people 18 to 20 years old willing to ask the larger questions. And a couple of examples of faculties responding to this have come to mind. One is St. Olaf College in Minnesota, where the faculty has devised what they call the Great Conversation, which replaces what we had back in the 1950s, the history of the humanities in relationship to the sciences, which we lost during the Cultural Revolution of the 60s. But now it's a new great conversation with the great thinkers, and once the program was successful for freshmen and sophomores, then they wanted to integrate a science and religion component. And I served as a consultant for that. And so here's an example of, I think, of a successful program which the faculty has to tackle these rather difficult problems, and they're doing it. Second example, Dominican University in Marin County has a program for their first 2 years called The Big Story. And the big story starts with the Big Bang, and it runs through the history of the universe, and then we get to Earth, and then the evolution of life, and then religion, of course, appears as a small chapter in the large story of evolution, and then we go on to science. So there's an ideological investment on the secular interpretation of the natural world, and the theologians are just kind of ticked off about this. And so this is an example where at least they're responding to the big question needs, but they haven't quite as successfully as the other case integrated them. But I think that this is the right time in education for targeting those young people, and faculties providing them with the big picture. Yeah.
I think the bishop first.
Thank you. Well, I'm a pastor turned academic to find out more about this question, and then being back in church leadership and finding how much is needed exactly of this reaching the broad masses, reaching the young generation. And I was wondering, Dennis, do you see sort of gender issues here? I recently saw numbers from Sweden saying that on an average, there's 20% of young people who think it's difficult to get creation and evolution together, and that's amazingly high to be Sweden, I think. And unfortunately, I think it's on the rise, both due to the new atheists taking ownership of enlightenment, of rationality, and all these things. But what also struck me that
20% on average means 40 to 45% among male population in urban environment. So I was wondering whether the Faraday Institute is aware of some of these figures, and do you have a strategy how to access that?
Well, yes, I mean, we're very aware of that problem, actually. I mean, thinking of the gender issue here, and it's always very noticeable that, you know, we have lots and lots of speakers coming every year in the science religion arena, and actually the number of female speakers is quite low, you know, and we're always trying to address that. And it seems that the number of females in the science religion arena is far less. Now, one can, you know, have a long discussion about why that is and so on, and then it also reflects back onto the number of those, you know, the gender issue in different branches of science is obviously a very real issue in many different countries, particularly in engineering and physics, certain areas, more so in some countries than others. So I think actually, in a way, the science religion discussion somewhat reflects a similar discussion going on within the scientific community, let's say, in regard to gender balance and gender equality and all that sort of thing. And that's in itself a big issue. What I don't know, actually, and as you were speaking, I was wondering, I can look up probably to see if we have the statistics, but from the schools, you know, the secondary school surveys that have been done, it would be very interesting to see what the gender differences might be there at a rather earlier age, to see in terms of this compartmentalization of science religion. But certainly there are data showing, for example, the number of people who go to the richarddawkins.net website, for example. I mean, it's something like 90% male and 10% female. So the new atheism is a male-dominated discussion. And so that's another part of this discussion as well, which is very interesting. So I think this is a fascinating area of research to be done here, actually. And gender issues impinge on lots and lots of things going on here, which are quite complicated. And I think one would need to do a lot more research before coming out with any kind of firm answers. But
Did either of you want to talk to that question particularly? No. Yes.
Yes, I'm Kitty Ferguson. I'm an independent scholar and writer. I wrote The Fire in the Equations a while back and recently wrote Stephen Hawking's biography. My question was, we talked about getting this sort of thing into the public schools. Are there projects that actually target church youth groups and Sunday school curricula and adult groups in churches too? And I find, as I go around and lecture on this subject, that clergy need more information about it. And I wonder how much our seminaries really deal with these questions.
well, just to mention that as part of the Test of Faith project I mentioned, there are materials for church leaders or for group leaders within churches, and also there's an adapted version of the Test of Faith materials actually generated by an organization called Youth for Christ in Britain, and it's specially designed for youth group leaders. And so these materials have been adapted for those target audiences. And by the way, there's also a version now for home schooling, which is very important, I think, because the homeschooling movement is so big in the United States. It's a very creationist-orientated movement. And so we now have a whole series of materials for homeschooling, which, picking up on Michael's points earlier on, is to help kids very early on have a proper sort of understanding of what creation really means. I think there's scope for a lot more materials. I'm just mentioning those because they're already out there, but clearly, and I think if denominations could design materials that would be specific to their denominations doing a similar job, that would be very, very helpful. One other thing, we have church leaders courses specially put on for church leaders, and I think that's really important as well, so that we bring in anybody who classifies themselves as a church leader to have a crash course at least for a weekend is at least something, to help people to get up to speed with the science and to be enthused about the science. So I think that's really important.
I'm Andrew Briggs, Professor of Nanomaterials at the University of Oxford. science and in theology at the University of Durham, where they're running a series of 3 short courses for senior management in the Church of England. So to each of those, they have several bishops coming from the Church of England. It will be very interesting to see how effective those are. I think it's tremendous that these people, the bishops and other senior church leaders, are giving time and commitment to that endeavor. I think we should watch this space.
I'm Doug Schwarzengerber from the University of Colorado and Pepperdine University, and just as an aside, there are biblical scholars in the U.S. that are working on curriculum and homeschool materials all the way back to like the 1st grade. This is for Dennis. I perceive as excuse me, BioLogos as being a kind of a parallel institution in the United States, organizations kind of trying to do some of the same things that you have done, but they encounter people like Ken Ham, Answers in Genesis, and Al Mohler, Southern Baptist, and even the Discovery Institute. And it seems as though they've come to a very difficult problem, and is how do you tell people like that, trying to speak the truth in love in the Christian manner, that their science is simply wrong, and that it's really difficult to have conversations when they will not change any of their perception of what the science is really telling us?
Yes, the Faraday Institute is parallel in some ways with BioLogos, but quite different in other ways, in the sense that we're, as you know, not focusing on that particular issue of evolution. It comes obviously comes into our materials and our courses, but we don't have a focus in that area. And to be honest, the engagement we have with the creationist movement is very small. I think they just think we're beyond the pale, probably. You know, we're not. We're sort of. So it's not that we're not looking for engagement if they want to. We have a few creationists who come to our courses, remarkably few actually. So our courses are open to any graduate or undergraduate from any university from the world, of any faith or none. And I would say in a summer course we might get, out of 50 people, we might get 2 creationists or something like that. So we have, and creationism is quite small, as you know, in Europe compared to the USA. So we don't actually encounter it that much, funnily enough. It's out there, but we're not specifically aiming to engage with that particular community. I mean, I've written a book about it and so on. You know, some of us have written books, but it's not, funnily enough, it doesn't. So every now and again, I get invited to debate with Ken Ham when he comes to the UK, and I politely decline. So maybe I should, but I don't. So, yeah.
Hello, Harvey Friedman, Ohio State University. I have some thoughts about this. This has to be looked at from the educational point of view, young people, but also senior people and scientific professionals. And I want to address, I'm going to make a comment about the latter. So even within a purely secular context, there's a widespread systemic resistance to consideration of big issues in favor of technical specialized concerns, even at our most prestigious academic centers worldwide. Now, I think this is a difficult but tractable problem and may need to be addressed successfully before a truly fruitful merging of religion and science can be achieved. You may want to comment on that.
Did you want to comment, Frederick?
No, I can pass it over to you.
I would certainly agree with that, and as I say, I think that's the direction that CTI has gone. But clearly the thrust of this whole discussion has been on the importance of raising the big questions at all levels, beginning with people discovering early on in their education that those are legitimate questions to raise about their own lives and about the work that they're doing. But then I think it's very important for those of us who are engaged in this science and religion dialogue not to see ourselves simply as missionaries for the results that have already been achieved. But I'm struck, having read and taught many of your works over a number of years, how different the questions are today as we pursue more deeply the questions of evolutionary biology, for example, instead of the focus on the questions of physics that preoccupied us a decade or so ago. So this you said you'd give me a summary comment. That's it. We've got to keep engaging those big questions at all levels.
Frederica, I think there are more questions in the hall, but we'll have to have them over coffee. Did you want to say anything else?
Well, I think maybe one thing that in Germany I observe also a counter movement that in school the teaching programs are a lot made to see students not an antagony between science and religion. And I think it is important to still have to keep the awareness for two different approaches, two different languages. And then I think the issue will be to have a platform for translation and conversation. I think this will be the productive way of fostering this dialogue.
I just want to share, because I heard the word merging science and religion, which was never Dad's concept, because he felt that the blessings of what mutual respect might be is to understand each other's questions. Many have charged that the foundation is trying to contaminate science by pushing theology into it. Dad never wanted to do that. Even with the Templeton Prize, he was very careful to say the goal of the Templeton Prize was never syncretism, because he thought the greatest blessing were the differences, and how yet one would hear the differences from each other and prosper. So it's much of what we've talked about here is the dialogue, and to find that there may be some barriers, but on the other hand, if why questions are a big part of theology, surely they're relevant to science questions, just as what and when are big questions for theology. So it's separation but respect, listening, and engagement.
Thank you. Well, thank you all, and thank you especially to our speakers for a wonderful session.